I want you to
I'm
vividly
too
picture
tired.
the exact highly orchestrated ritual that
it's
takes
only
place
Monday,
in millions
right?
of middle-class living
Don't
rooms
remind
every
me.
single evening. You come home from an exhausting, soul-draining
to
day
stop this.
at your corporate job. You
Just
drop your
push
keys
the
on the
button.
counter, you collapse onto your comfortable couch, and you immediately turn on the massive, glowing television screen. You flip the channel to the premier global financial news network.
The
The
markets
screen
are holding strong
is an
today.
absolute
We
explosion
are seeing
of
positive
highly
growth
engineered
across
sensory
the board.
stimulation. Bright red and glowing green ticker symbols scroll endlessly across the bottom of the screen at a hypnotic speed. A sharply dressed, highly charismatic television anchor is staring directly into the camera, waving his hands frantically, screaming at the top of his lungs about a revolutionary new technology stock that is guaranteed to change the absolute fabric of the global economy. They bring on a panel of supposed Wall Street experts, all wearing incredibly expensive tailored suits, unanimously nodding their heads and declaring that this specific company is a once-in-a-lifetime generational buying opportunity. You feel a massive, uncontrollable surge of dopamine flood your biological brain. You feel the intense, primal anxiety of missing out on the wealth that everyone else seems to be capturing. You quickly open your retail brokerage application on your cellular phone, and you blindly smash the buy button, investing 3 months of your hard-earned physical labor into a company you had never even heard of 48 hours ago. You sit back, entirely convinced that you have just executed a brilliant financial maneuver. Today, I am going to violently rip the mask off the most brilliant, highly sophisticated, and mathematically devastating psychological trap ever constructed by the global financial elite. I am going straight into the dark heart of the financial entertainment industry to expose the absolute, terrifying reality of mainstream investment news. The traditional banking system and the massive corporate media conglomerates have aggressively brainwashed you into believing that financial television networks exist to educate the working class and provide you with actionable, highly profitable investment advice. That is a massive, mathematically lethal lie. In this incredibly dense, reality-shattering video, we are going to violently deconstruct the exact mechanical anatomy of a Wall Street wealth transfer. We will expose the terrifying concept of exit liquidity, explain exactly how the untouchable elite use television anchors to manipulate your human psychology, and show you exactly why buying a stock based on a mainstream news recommendation is the absolute equivalent of walking voluntarily into a highly efficient financial slaughterhouse. And if you stick with me until the absolute end of this reality-breaking broadcast, I will give you the exact, highly structured operational blueprint to permanently assassinate your addiction to financial entertainment, aggressively unlearn your deeply ingrained fear of missing out, and forcefully transition from a bleeding retail casualty into an untouchable, mathematically lethal master of sovereign capital. To completely comprehend the massive magnitude of this psychological warfare, you must first deeply understand the fundamental mathematical problem facing every single billionaire hedge fund manager and massive institutional investor on the planet. When a true master of the economic universe decides it is time to sell a massive position in a specific asset, they cannot simply open an application on their phone and click a button like a retail consumer. If a massive global institution needs to sell 10 million shares of a highly inflated technology stock, they face a terrifying structural dilemma. If they dump 10 million shares into the open market all at once, the sheer immense volume of their massive sell order will violently crush the mathematical price of the stock, triggering a catastrophic market collapse before they can even extract a fraction of their profits. In order to successfully sell a massive, multi-billion-dollar position at the absolute highest possible price, the institutional seller mathematically requires an equally massive wave of aggressive, highly motivated buyers on the exact opposite side of the trade. They need an ocean of blind, eager capital willing to absorb their massive, heavy bags of overvalued equity. In the dark, highly cynical language of Wall Street, this ocean of blind retail capital is known by two terrifying words: exit liquidity. You must profoundly understand that the true global elite do not view the working class as fellow investors. They view you strictly as the exact biological exit liquidity required to execute their massive corporate escapes. But how do the masters of the universe mathematically generate a massive, overwhelming wave of retail buying pressure at the exact precise moment they want to abandon a sinking ship? They deploy the most highly weaponized marketing arm ever created in the history of human capitalism. They activate the mainstream financial news networks. Let us violently deconstruct the exact chronological timeline of a massive institutional wealth transfer. Long before you ever hear the name of a specific company on your television screen, the silent accumulation phase occurs in the absolute shadows. Months or even years in advance, the incredibly highly capitalized elite quietly begin buying massive blocks of shares through invisible dark pools and secretive institutional trading desks. They mathematically engineer their purchases to remain completely hidden from the public eye, slowly building a massive ownership stake at rock-bottom prices. During this incredibly quiet phase, the financial news networks are completely silent. The charismatic television anchors do not mention the stock. There are no flashing graphics and no urgent breaking news alerts. The elite are gathering their massive ammunition in absolute, total darkness. Once the institutional masters have successfully filled their massive invisible vaults with cheap equity, the narrative engineering phase violently begins. The corporate elite activate their massive network of highly paid public relations firms, strategic media contacts, and heavily compromised financial analysts. Suddenly, a trickle of highly positive, carefully orchestrated news stories begins to leak into the traditional financial press. A massive global investment bank releases a highly optimistic research report, drastically raising their price target for the specific stock. A highly influential corporate chief executive officer makes a vague but incredibly exciting statement about a revolutionary new product timeline. The mathematical price of the stock begins to climb steadily upward, catching the attention of the highly complex algorithmic trading machines and the momentum day traders. But the trap is not yet fully sprung. The elite are patiently waiting for the absolute perfect moment to unleash the final psychological strike against the deeply asleep middle class. The climax of the financial slaughterhouse arrives during the massive mainstream media blitz, when the mathematical price of the stock reaches the exact stratospheric peak that the institutional elite have secretly predetermined as their exit target. The financial television networks violently erupt. The stock becomes the absolute center of the global financial universe. The glowing red and green graphics flash with blinding intensity. The television anchors practically jump over their desks, shouting that the retail investor must buy this stock immediately or risk being permanently left behind in the new economy. They parade an endless line of heavily compensated guests who all confidently predict that the stock will mathematically double in value over the next 30 days. They aggressively weaponize your natural human greed and your deep biological terror of missing a golden opportunity. They manufacture a state of absolute psychological hysteria, completely bypassing your rational, mathematical brain and striking directly at your emotional core. And in that exact, specific moment of manufactured television hysteria, the great, massive wealth transfer occurs. As millions of deeply asleep, highly emotional middle-class workers frantically press the buy button on their cellular phones, injecting billions of dollars of their hard-earned physical human energy into the market at the absolute highest possible price, the invisible masters of the universe quietly step out of the shadows. The institutional elite aggressively dump their massive, multi-million share positions directly into the raging ocean of retail demand. They mathematically execute their perfectly planned escape, feeding their heavily overvalued shares directly into the open mouths of the terrified, greedy retail public. Every single share that a working-class father buys in a desperate attempt to secure his retirement was mathematically sold to him by a billionaire hedge fund manager who is locking in a massive, life-changing profit. The mainstream financial news network did not give you actionable investment advice. They provided the exact, highly orchestrated psychological marketing campaign required to turn you into the elite's personal exit liquidity. The deeply tragic, mathematically inevitable aftermath is always exactly the same. Once the institutional elite have successfully liquidated their massive positions and extracted billions of dollars from the retail public, the heavy buying pressure completely evaporates. The stock mathematically runs out of fuel. The television anchors suddenly stop talking about the revolutionary technology. The glowing graphics fade away, replaced by the next heavily orchestrated distraction. And then, the mathematical gravity violently takes hold. The price of the overvalued stock begins a brutal, relentless collapse, plunging 20, 40, or even 80% from its absolute peak. The working-class investor is left holding a massive, incredibly heavy bag of worthless digital equity. They are completely paralyzed by shock and deep emotional shame, mathematically trapped in a highly toxic holding pattern, desperately praying for the stock to miraculously recover to the price they originally paid. But the money is completely gone. It was legally, efficiently, and ruthlessly transferred from the hands of the impatient, emotional retail consumer directly into the private bank accounts of the highly disciplined, robotic, institutional producer. If you are listening to this exact, specific sentence right now, and you feel a massive, heavy, physical, iron blindfold violently ripping off your exhausted face, realizing that your entire interaction with the traditional financial media has been a carefully engineered psychological trap. You are officially stepping out of the toxic casino of the asleep middle class. But I must issue a very serious, urgent psychological warning right now. Violently assassinating your deeply ingrained cultural addiction to financial entertainment is an incredibly painful, terrifying, deep psychological process. Your highly conditioned, biological human brain will violently, aggressively fight you, desperately begging to return to the deeply comforting, highly emotional dopamine rush of watching the flashing ticker symbols and believing the charismatic television anchors. You must be completely, absolutely mentally prepared to endure this terrifying, massive psychological withdrawal in order to secure your permanent, absolute, massive, mathematical freedom. Grab a heavy iron pen and a completely blank piece of physical paper right now. Eliminate absolutely all deeply toxic physical distractions around you. Violently turn off your glowing, brightly colored television screen and strictly prepare to execute this actionable, highly structured step-by-step escape plan to permanently violently assassinate your toxic presence in the traditional financial media matrix. It is time to aggressively unlearn your emotional, toxic relationship with market entertainment. and forcefully transition from a highly drained, heavily bleeding retail casualty into an untouchable, mathematically highly lethal master of absolute sovereign leverage. Rule number 1, you must radically, completely, and violently sever your absolute psychological connection to mainstream financial television and entertainment media. You must profoundly understand that the glowing rectangular box in your living room is not a tool of educational enlightenment. It is a highly weaponized corporate marketing machine designed entirely to harvest your attention and direct your capital into pre-planned institutional slaughterhouses. You must permanently stop watching the daily market updates. You must aggressively delete the highly toxic stock tracking applications that send you constant urgent notifications. And you must violently block the social media gurus who scream about the next massive cryptocurrency explosion. If a specific financial asset has reached the front page of a mainstream news website or the primetime slot of a television network, the massive institutional money has already been mathematically made, and the elite are actively looking for a naive retail buyer to take their heavy bags. By entirely turning off the noise, you mathematically protect your highly valuable human capital from the incredibly destructive force of manufactured emotional hysteria. Rule number 2, you must aggressively initiate a relentless campaign to decode the true, highly hidden language of global capital flow. The deeply asleep middle class listens blindly to what the corporate executives and the television anchors loudly say on the public broadcasts. The sovereign, untouchable elite absolutely ignore the public words and strictly monitor what the massive institutional money mathematically does in the shadows. You must transition your completely valuable time away from watching emotional entertainment and actively invest your energy into studying the cold, hard, undeniable mathematics of insider transaction filings, massive dark pool volume anomalies, and heavy institutional accumulation patterns. You must mathematically realize that the true, highly valuable financial data is incredibly boring, highly complex, and completely devoid of flashing red and green graphics. When you learn to track the silent footprints of the massive global producers, you completely eliminate your reliance on the toxic public narratives and position yourself mathematically alongside the architects of the Matrix, rather than acting as their blind, desperate exit liquidity. Rule number 3, you must completely embrace the absolute, undeniable, highly structural superpower of transitioning your human capital entirely away from highly manipulated public casino markets and aggressively into the realm of private, heavily controlled sovereign assets. The absolute greatest, most highly lethal financial weapon you possess is a highly disciplined, perfectly controlled human mind, emptied of all massive, toxic financial anxiety and blind emotional hope in public equities. The true masters of the economic universe do not build their massive foundational wealth by day trading highly volatile public stocks against incredibly advanced supercomputers. They actively, aggressively deploy their valuable capital to build massive, highly impenetrable, heavy titanium corporate business structures that they mathematically, physically control. They acquire high-level digital infrastructure, they build heavily cash-flowing private internet properties, and they leverage non-recourse commercial debt to purchase distressed physical real estate. When you mathematically control a massive private asset that generates highly predictable daily cash flow, you become entirely immune to the violent psychological swings of the public stock market. You stop caring about what the television anchors scream about because your personal wealth is completely detached from their engineered casino. You mathematically stop playing the highly rigged game of trying to guess which direction the flashing ticker will move. and you become the absolute sovereign architect of your own unshakable private economy. Let us thoroughly summarize this brutal, incredibly mind-bending mathematical absolute reality before you go out and take massive, life-changing, aggressive action today. The traditional societal concept of consuming highly emotional financial news and reacting blindly to mainstream investment recommendations is a highly structurally designed, highly efficient, deep psychological trap intended to keep you permanently locked inside the lower levels of the financial panopticon. They aggressively and constantly weaponize your natural human greed and your deep biological fear of missing out to legally extract your incredibly valuable human capital, converting your natural desire for financial freedom into mathematical exit liquidity for the corporate elite. The traditional societal behavior to constantly remain glued to a flashing television screen, entirely surrendering your highly valuable emotional control to charismatic anchors, while completely ignoring the undeniable structural power of private equity and cash flow, is the absolute most deeply dangerous, highly toxic, and mathematically destructive lifestyle in the modern world. It mathematically guarantees that you will remain a highly drained, constantly bleeding target, permanently trapped on an incredibly deeply exhausting, rusty, heavy iron hamster wheel of endless emotional financial devastation. The absolute only possible mathematical way to completely win this heavily rigged game is to violently unplug yourself from the massive, highly toxic financial entertainment matrix, aggressively embrace incredibly highly calculated private asset control, and forcefully adopt the invisible, untouchable, godlike lifestyle of a mathematically completely disciplined sovereign architect, exactly like a true master of the absolute economic universe. If this deeply terrifying, incredibly reality-shattering, massive mathematical information finally opened your highly exhausted eyes, if you feel like I just violently ripped you out of the highly toxic, incredibly massive, traditional financial media prison, and finally handed you the absolute dark structural truth about exactly why the untouchable global elite always win today, then I absolutely need you to violently destroy that massive blue like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel right now. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the extremely high level, highly aggressive wealth building mathematical strategies we have coming up next on this massive reality breaking, highly advanced channel. And speaking of massive, highly complex financial traps that are specifically engineered to violently, completely control your daily behavior and mathematically, absolutely guarantee that the exact same massive corporate system violently, heavily, aggressively extracts massive, completely unjustified compliance from your everyday life while hiding behind a false mask of nobility. If you truly want to deeply understand the absolute biggest, most highly manipulative mathematical incredible lie ever told by the massive traditional education system, and exactly how the highly revered concept of the 4-year university degree is a massive, incredibly toxic real estate hedge fund designed entirely to permanently enslave your future human energy in absolutely inescapable, non-dischargeable lifetime debt before your adult brain has even fully mathematically developed, you absolutely must watch the next incredibly massive, highly specifically structured video right here on the bright glowing screen. In it, I completely violently break down the absolute ultimate academic compliance illusion, and I show you exactly why the true, incredibly highly advanced global elite build private empires instead of collecting worthless, inflated paper credentials. Click that massive video right now. Your incredibly highly absolute future, highly calculating, absolutely untethered, and permanently financially free self will eternally thank you. I will entirely, completely see you over there. On the absolutely other massive, highly specific side.